Chapter 8. How much green electricity is needed to decarbonise? A grid is a vital component of an electricity system. A national grid is in fact a network. A network makes the same sense for the supergrid as it does for a conventional national electricity system. A Europe-wide network provides electricity security for the continent, just as a national meshed transmission arrangement does for local energy security. At time of writing, studies have been carried out on continent-wide grids, including one by University College Dublin and another in the US. The UCD study concluded a fully integrated pan-European energy system can reduce costs by up to 39%. The US study was carried out by Patrick R. Brown et al. On the value of inter-regional coordination and transmission in decarbonising the US electricity system. This shows that interstate coordination and transmission expansion reduce the system cost of electricity in a 100% renewable US power system by 46%, compared with a state-by-state approach, from $135 per megawatt hour to $73 per megawatt hour. This research was published in Science Direct, Volume 5, Issue 1. Both studies show that isolated electricity systems sell more expensive electricity than interconnected ones. Indeed, Ireland has the EU's highest electricity prices. Electricity is the future because it can be generated from renewable sources, and complete electrification means that Europe relies upon a free, native fuel source. And so, everything should be electrified as quickly as possible, and everybody wins. One potentially misleading assumption is that energy efficiency is going to reduce the demand for electricity. Take the case of LEDs, light-emitting diodes, which consume 1/10 of the energy needed to power old light bulbs. Building management systems can control large offices to minimise consumption. That could cut in half the electricity needed for as many as 1/3 of buildings. That and many other wins in the energy efficiency area are certainly true. Principal Dan Walter from RMI is right when writing that renewables come with a leap in energy productivity. Renewables get straight to work. Renewables generate electricity directly, bypassing the inefficient conversion from heat to work. As renewables replace fossil fuels, we'll see a massive, once-in-a-century leap in energy productivity, similar to the post-World War II boom when oil and gas took over from coal and biomass. But humans are humans. We want more. We have more screens and more appliances. We might all drive electric vehicles over the next 20 years, and we might even install electric air conditioning as standard in Irish homes and offices. We might have more electricity-intensive hospitals and care homes and facilities for an ageing population. We might leave on screens and lights in a different way and undermine all the energy efficiency wins. We might increase the need for data centres, and even industries that were considered too expensive might move to Ireland over the next 20 or 30 years. This is known as Jevons paradox. The dynamic means that we are likely to consume more electricity rather than less over the coming 30 years, and we need to plan for that. Efficiency in the use of energy is, however, going to happen with electrification. Today, about 20% of energy that we pay for is electricity. Going to full electrification should therefore mean that electricity demand will increase by a factor of 5. This will not be the case because electricity is in itself more efficient than burning fossil fuels for our energy needs. In fact, as any Sankey diagram demonstrates, see Figure 1 for a simplified version, about 66% of primary energy is lost on average when we burn fossil fuels for end use as heat, transport, and electricity. Assuming that all primary energy used by fossil fuels must be replaced by an equivalent amount of clean energy is known as the primary energy fallacy. As clearly explained by RMI in their recent work Energy After Fire, electrification makes the total decarbonisation problem a lot smaller and more solvable in the time available. Given the increasingly urgent need to decarbonise the energy system due to the increasingly local and tangible effects of climate change, electrification is likely to be the best, indeed only, opportunity. It has the added benefits of not burning things, if done right. There is merit, at this point, in going through the various strategies which will allow decarbonisation of energy supply to happen. In doing so, it will be shown how electrifying everything begins the healing of the atmosphere, while at the same time reducing the amount of energy we currently pay for. We will calculate each component of the transition to sustainability and arrive at a quantity of electricity that will meet all of Europe's energy needs. Rooftop solar is a game changer. On average, I estimate about half of residential electricity demand could come from solar panels on the roof, plus a battery or an electric car by 2050. Across Europe, that means, on average, and as soon as panels and systems are cheap enough and well supported by grants, no-brainer, that about 675 terawatt-hours of electricity demand could be met. So instead of this electricity being supplied by the local utility, it will be self-generated by residential buildings. The assumption made in arriving at this calculation is that half the houses in Europe, 128 million, will have 12 metres squared of solar panels installed on their houses. For example, in our home country, Ireland, rooftop solar is okay, somewhere between a grade C and a B in terms of how well it has been subsidised, communicated, and rolled out. A few hundred megawatts were installed at a rate of about 50 households per week during 2023. Much could be improved to optimise this from a system level, furthering standardisation from economies of scale and reducing the adoption barriers on individuals who each go through independent decision-making processes. The technology will always be changing, but I do not believe that it is accessible to all in the way that it should be. More needs to be done, and quicker, to put in that decentralised energy infrastructure and take pressure off the public networks. Solar panels will also be installed on offices and service buildings. Approximately 38 million European offices and other service buildings is assumed, and 18 metres squared of solar PV on their roofs would produce 296 terawatt-hours. Another 28 million industrial rooftops hosting 30 metres squared of solar PV would produce 364 terawatt-hours. What all this means is that the need for publicly supplied electricity goes down by 1,335 terawatt-hours across Europe. There is a case to be made that every new house, commercial premises, and industrial complex should be fitted with PV panels in place of tiles, concrete, or metal roofs. Such products are available on the market currently, and an EU directive on the subject would reap huge savings in bought fossil-fueled energy, as well as helping clean up the environment. Market dynamics will play a role in converting roofs to mini solar power stations. Thanks to massive investment 20 years ago in primarily Chinese PV supply chains, Europe has been able to deploy solar at utility and consumer scale and continually reduce prices while the offering has improved. Similarly, market dynamics and education can be used to promote improved demand response. Households can be educated and incentivized through pricing tariffs to adjust their consumption patterns with widely available technology such as smart plugs and white goods timers to better fit their generation patterns, and the hours of peak renewable energy generation. e.g. by charging heat pumps at night. There is no such nationwide education and no dynamic market incentives in our home market of Ireland at time of writing. The same observation we expect is true in many markets across Europe. What has been outlined above in terms of rooftop PV installations is a lot, but each installation pays for itself in almost every interpretation of the phrase, and we just need to get on with it as fast as possible. Road transport. Currently, electric vehicles, EVs, are somewhat expensive in Europe still. Recently, however, competitive models are being introduced from China, which has reached large-scale EV manufacturing to serve its huge domestic market faster than the Western OEMs have pivoted to the cars of the future. Limiting the availability of high-quality, cost-competitive technology from other regions would be detrimental to the cost of living in Europe, climate and energy transition goals. In the medium to long term, the protectionism being debated currently would do the European car manufacturing industry no favours. In general, this is largely due to higher purchasing costs. It cannot be forgotten that running costs of EVs are potentially a lot lower than those of the internal combustion engine, ICE, or hydrogen-burning fuel cells. For how important EVs are to the complete decarbonisation of the energy system, what they offer is nearly unique. The user experience is immediate, quiet, better acceleration, less mechanical parts prone to breakdowns. It is why they are such an important part of the transition to zero-carbon society. People get a direct experience of something better and good for the environment. Road transport accounts for about 30% of global energy use. It is in the area of road transport that the efficiency benefits of using EVs can be seen most clearly. The efficiency of the fleet, meaning the amount of basic energy in the fuel that is converted into driving energy, goes from approximately 20% in the case of the ICE to 85% for battery-powered cars. In a future decarbonised world, all the electricity will come from sustainable sources. This reasoning presupposes that electricity, and not hydrogen, is the fuel used. If hydrogen is used, and has been derived from water by electrolysis, an efficiency of 12% is achieved by using the ICE, while an efficiency of 30% is achieved using fuel cells. Converts to decarbonisation will say that there are different types of better. But a faster car that is also cheaper to run and good for the environment is hard to argue against. Of course, there are counter-arguments. There are life cycle aspects to consider around mining and recycling batteries at huge scale. The charging network is not as good as it could be. Elon Musk might divide opinion. The prices for EVs are still too high to be fully accessible. I'm not saying they are a magic bullet, but they are more visible every day than your PV panels or a wind farm in the sea, and so they bring decarbonisation to the commute, to the family trip, to the conversation over pints. What I have to do is form a hypothesis based on experience, not hope. And that leads me to propose that car ownership will remain the norm. The transport of cities will be hugely improved by electric public transport and cycling, but the game-changing trajectory of transport over the next 30 years is decarbonising the electricity in cars and trucks. So, I have assumed normal driving patterns, but 100% of personal vehicles in 2050 will be electric, charged mainly at night, and integrate into the energy system as local storage and even grid balancing as part of an advanced demand response. This means a lot of small batteries can play a part in reducing the amount of large batteries on the grid. But their biggest impact will be in balancing supply and demand across 24 hours of day and night, and freeing up any remaining hydrocarbons in the economy for non-transport related end uses. I don't think this is ambitious or unrealistic. If anything, it is conservative. Aurora, an independent group of companies working across every aspect of the sustainability and innovation agenda, and ENSO-E agree. This one seems to be banked in all analyses of grids and energy systems in 2050. To compare back to all that rooftop solar, they roughly balance out. Growth in EV demand by the household consumer with demand met by rooftop solar. But watch out for those averages, which only work if the network is able to move power around pretty instantly over where you are averaging. Otherwise, you might have a lot of angry EV owners during a wet week in Ireland. Heat. Moving to a bigger average number, and something that also leads to arguments at home, is how to transition from gas heating to decarbonised heating and bonus cooling, while not taking out a second mortgage to pay for it. With such volatility continuing in markets, and without getting into the dynamics of the global power systems you may be supporting, is there a strong enough reason to invest now in electrical heat pumps for the majority of residential buildings and beyond? First, address the envelope of every building and retrofit. Insulation, new windows, no chimneys, all the basics, which is a mammoth task in itself. However, we can't and shouldn't wait until one is done before starting the other. Converting all homes to be well insulated, electric conditioned, and containing PV is expensive, but less expensive than not doing it. Here is where government legislation could help accelerate the green transition. Every new house could be mandated to comply with the highest standards. In the Irish context, as an example, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, SEAI, has thus far prioritised home insulation and envelope improvements under the Fabric First approach. Meanwhile, with old building stock, since deep home retrofitting is expensive and relatively intrusive, plus building labour is in short supply, old gas and oil boilers are replaced with new gas boilers every week, locking in further reliance on imported fossil fuels for another 10 to 20-year cycle. Arguments by experts for the alternative electrification first approach, based on urgency, are growing louder. The space heating sector is dominated by fossil fuel-based heating. See Figure 35. The European Commission performed an analysis of the heat load from Europe today and how this translates to potential electrical load. This was a comprehensive study that calculated the heating load from buildings. The report provided key calculations and assumptions. The results of the calculation presented a staggering figure for future energy demand for heating, a demand of over 3,100 terawatt-hours, which equals total European electricity demand today. It is made up of 1,904 terawatt-hours, 758 terawatt-hours, and 496 terawatt-hours from the domestic, services, and industrial sectors, respectively. Eventual improvements in insulation, optimised ventilation with heat recovery, increased urbanisation, heat islands, and global warming will lead to a decrease of the load. Increased population, dwelling size, and comfort levels will lead to an increase in space heating load. The adoption of heat pumps and electric heating alternatives will bring huge gains in energy efficiency with a coefficient of performance, COP, that is between 3 and 5 times higher than the COP for typical gas boilers. In simple terms, when electricity is used along with heat pumps to heat premises, low-grade heat amounts to 3 to 5 times the electrical energy that was used in the heat pump. Gas-fired heating, on the other hand, means that 95%, using condensing boilers, of the heat in the gas is transferred to the house as heat. There can be no sustainable argument for the use of natural gas or indeed hydrogen for home heating when heat pumps are so widely available. Jeanne Rosenau of the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, has collected over 50 independent studies supporting this. They make clear that hydrogen will have no place in residential or commercial heating. The meta-analysis, including most of these studies, is published in peer-reviewed journals, and further studies continue to emerge. Heat pumps represent a natural energy efficiency measure, as indeed the use of electricity to drive vehicles also does. To take a practical example for the individual householder, consider this example, which compares a really efficient gas boiler with an efficient heat pump. Taking energy prices as they might be in the medium term at €0.12 per kilowatt hour for residential gas and €0.35 per kilowatt hour for electricity, we will consider an example of turning the heating on for 5 hours a day for 180 days a year, which is quite a lot. Let's say 10 kilowatts of heating is required for the house, just for easy numbers, but it doesn't really matter as we are comparing the same heat demand in the same house. One house is heated by burning gas in a boiler and pumping hot water around, and the other with a heat pump with no flame and no gas needed. Let's say the gas heating is 90% efficient and the heat pump has a COP of 3, or is 300% efficient. At those prices, which are not far off at the time of writing, for that of 9,000 kilowatt hours, 180 by 5 by 10, of heating needed in the house, the gas option costs €1,200 and the electric option costs €1,050. So you have a better solution, with no gas flue needed, no flame, no gas standing charge, if you can electrify everything, and you free up activity in the energy economy to continue to decarbonise those kilowatt hours that you get by using electrons instead of burning molecules. Furthermore, heat pumps, coupled with market incentives to promote charging during high renewable generation hours, including dynamic pricing tariffs and smart switches, can help balance electricity supply and demand, and optimise existing generation and transmission infrastructure to reduce the total amount of upfront investment required to meet the new electric load. At higher levels of heat pump efficiency, such as 400% or even 500%, which are possible, the balance of using heat pumps over gas boilers swings even further towards heat pumps. It should be pointed out in passing that burning gas to produce 10,000 kilowatt hours releases 1.9 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. As carbon taxes become more used as a tool of policy, and as Ireland moves to a carbon price of €100 per tonne of CO2 released, the homeowner will be liable for an additional charge of €190. Intentional fiscal policy also has a role to play here, to ensure that the so-called spark gap, the ratio of electricity to gas prices paid by the final end consumer, including tax treatment, incentivises rather than hinders the switch, as is still the case in many European markets. The European Commission report also calculates the cooling load for Europe. This is a significantly smaller number, but a vital calculation nonetheless. The final figure for the cooling load for the future results in a final electricity demand figure of 540 terawatt-hours. This is made up of 350 terawatt-hours, 133 terawatt-hours, and 57 terawatt-hours from the domestic, services, and industrial sectors. The assumption made in our calculations was that both heating and cooling loads would be 100% electrified. There is discussion on the use of hydrogen and other alternative fuels that could be used, but it is my belief that because hydrogen will require electricity for the process of electrolysis to produce it, electricity will always be cheaper than hydrogen. See Chapter 10. Every industry is different, and their energy and feedstock requirements therefore vary considerably. Without a detailed knowledge of each industry's need for energy, as well as hydrogen feedstock, it is difficult to calculate what a future decarbonised scenario looks like. The iron ore, cement, glass, and ceramics industries will undoubtedly need hydrogen. It is not outside the bounds of possibility that many of these industries will relocate to parts of the world where hydrogen can be manufactured cheaply. Europe cannot compete with desert areas for cheap solar, and offshore wind, given the massive foundations needed, cannot compete with cheap solar. It is virtually impossible to commercially transport raw hydrogen. In the calculations which follow, hydrogen use in industry or indeed anywhere else is not considered. Therefore, the figures arrived at below are the minimal, as producing hydrogen doubles the electricity demand. There is a rationale for leaving out hydrogen use, and it goes as follows. Using hydrogen in steelmaking and as a chemical feedstock is not primarily an energy use. It is as a reducing agent. Reducing means removing oxygen. Iron ore needs the oxygen removed so that almost pure steel can be produced. As a chemical feedstock, hydrogen is used to add hydrogen to a molecule. The subject of this book is all about energy, and so the needs of the above industries, while very important, are ignored. My working hypothesis is that a decarbonised future would look something like Figure 36, where a sectorial demand view of the future is presented. As can be seen, there is an increase in the demand for electricity of between 2.5 and 3, depending on which base year is used in the calculation. And so, the question that has to be asked is how the future demand for electricity is to be met. The answer is outlined in Figures 37 and 38. Figure 38 gives the average capacity factors that have been arrived at for the various technologies mentioned. The onshore wind figure of 29% is higher than has been achieved to date. It is assumed because bigger turbines in the order of 6 to 7 megawatts at higher tower heights will be the norm on land. It differs greatly from the average capacity factors applied by the Commission's 1.5 tech scenario, 50%, as I can see no justification for such optimism. Even when I build turbines high on the sides of Atlantic-facing mountains in the west of Ireland, with 9 metres per second wind speeds, the capacity factor was 40%. A capacity factor of 76% for nuclear is low. A normal nuclear power station in the first 40 years of life should have a capacity factor of 90%. However, the recent experience of France, whose megawattage is higher than the rest of Europe put together, is instructive. France's average capacity factor for the previous 10 years was 71%. By 2022, this had fallen to 52%, as 23 gigawatts of the nuclear fleet is over 40 years old. So, by 2050, many of the older nuclear power stations will be retired and new ones built. They will, in all probability, not be able to run at 90% of their potential output because of the huge quantity of non-dispatchable renewables on the European system. Offshore wind will have much higher capacity factors than onshore and will be the biggest single contributor to electricity generation in Europe. Experience has shown us that a capacity factor of 55% has been achieved in the North Sea. When the higher wind speeds of the North Atlantic are accessed via floating technology, a capacity factor of 60% will easily be achieved. A solar capacity factor of 30% is, in Europe, higher than can be achieved currently. However, between scale effects on the cost of producing solar panels and new emerging technologies, such as perovskite, I believe 30% could be attained. Given the massive growth in PV installations recently, the 1,000 gigawatts for the EU may be on the low side. In its decarbonised scenario for the EU, ENTSO-E assumes 2,246 terawatt-hours solar generation by 2050, compared to the 2,626 terawatt-hours presented here. ENTSO-E assumes lower capacity factors but higher installations. What is obvious is that a demand of 9,700 terawatt-hours cannot be met without a supergrid. Chapter Key Points. 1. In Europe, by 2050, demand for electricity will be between 2.5 times and 3 times what it is today, and has to be fully decarbonised. 2. A meshed supergrid, continental in scale, provides 32% cheaper electricity than can be provided by individual nations, where energy generation and transmission is contained within their boundaries. 3. Although energy efficiency can reduce demand, humans have a certain budget in mind and use efficiency savings to buy more appliances, electric vehicles, and perhaps air conditioners. 4. Europe uses electricity for 24% of its energy needs today. That should mean that roughly 4 times the electricity would be needed with complete electrification. In fact, because of the inherent efficiency of electric vehicles and heat pumps, demand only increases threefold. 5. There are positive behaviour feedback loops from electrifying all this consumption in Europe. Just like fibre broadband changed the way we can work more flexibly, better air quality and cooling in summer come with more efficient electrical home heating. 6. As Sankey diagrams illustrate, electrification hugely improves total energy efficiency, making the decarbonisation problem much smaller. 7. Averages can trick you. Across Europe, annual rooftop solar generation and new annual electric vehicle demand roughly average out across a year, but not at the same time. These are annual averages and vary by location. 8. The choice is between duplication of energy systems and huge waste and cost, or a smarter, cleaner, cheaper energy system connected by a large electrical grid.